Good afternoon, Year 10. I thought I'd start off this series of looking at the poetry with exposure. Some of you were here when we did it the first time, but I'm aware that a few of you were absent, and so we're going to come back to this in some detail this afternoon or this evening or this morning, whenever you end up looking at this. I hope this finds you well, and I hope that you're all keeping well while you're off school, keeping yourselves busy and in a good routine. I put my email address on the post on Show My Homework, so that if you do want to contact me, if you have any questions or if you have anything you want to check, then you can get in touch with me through that. Also, I've opened the Submit tab on Show My Homework so that you can upload photos of your notes or upload a typed file to show me what you've done, so I can give you some feedback about how to push on and develop. We'll do this in 3 stages. The first stage will be an initial reading, where we talk about the context, where we consider some of the bigger issues that Owen is exploring. Then we'll look at the poem in more detail. We'll think about the structure. We'll think about how Owen has sequenced the ideas in the poem and the patterns. And then finally, we will take some time to take some quotations apart. But to begin with, when we're thinking about the poem, we can also think about the context first, and that's where we're going to start. So in the initial point, I would be annotating along with me, but also add some of your own ideas at the same time, so that when you submit this, I can have a look at that and check on the quality of that thinking. So to begin with, the context. And with this, the crucial thing to understand is this is a World War I poem, and that Owen was an officer in the army. And we'd be thinking about the care for his soldiers. And we'd be thinking about his concerns for their well-being. World War I was particularly brutal, and it was particularly challenging and difficult. And actually, we know that he saw the struggles every day on the front. And that challenged him. And he found that to be particularly damning and problematic. And many of his poems are poems of protest. And that's definitely worth being aware of and making a point of. In many ways, these are poems that give examples about why war is such a damaging institution, such a damaging process to the individual, to soldiers, to the army, to the military, to nations as a whole. And we can think about sometimes the psychological impact as well. And in that sense, if you were to get this in the exam, you might cross-reference it with Remains as a choice, because that is a poem that is particularly exploring PTSD and the consequences of armed conflict. So have those things in mind when we're reading it. We might just start to pick up on some of those aspects. But equally, and for those of you in the lesson, you'll know that this is also a poem about stillness and about waiting. And in many ways, both these things lead to the final images of the poem, focusing in on immobility, this inability of the soldiers to move, to escape, to move away. So let's start reading this through together now. Exposure, Wilfred Owen. Our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds that knife us. Wearied, we keep awake because the night is silent. Low drooping flares confuse our memory of the salient. Worried by silent sentries whisper, curious, nervous, but nothing happens. Watching, we hear the mad gusts tugging on the wire, like twitching agonies of men among its brambles. Northward, incessantly, the flickering gunnery rumbles. Far off, like a dull rumour of some other war. What are we doing here? The poignant misery of dawn begins to grow. We only know war lasts, rain soaks, and clouds sag stormy. Dawn massing in the east, her melancholy army attacks once more in ranks on shivering ranks of grey, but nothing happens. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence, less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow, with sidelong flowing flakes that flock, pause and renew. We watch them wandering up and down the wind's nonchalance, but nothing happens. Pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. We cringe in holes, back on forgotten dreams, and stare, snow-dazed, deep into grassier ditches. So we drowse, sun-dozed, littered with blossoms trickling where the blackbird fusses. Is it that we are dying? Slowly, our ghosts drag home. glimpsing the sunk fires, glozed with crusted dark red jewels, crickets jingle there. For hours the innocent mice rejoice, the house is theirs. Shutters and doors all closed, on us the doors are closed, we turn back to our dying. Since we believe not otherwise can kind fires burn, now ever suns smile true on child or field or fruit. For God's invincible spring our love is made afraid. Therefore not loath we lie out there, therefore we're born for love of God seems dying. Tonight this frost will fasten on this mud and us, shrivelling many hands and puckering foreheads crisp. The burying party picks and shovels in shaking grasp, pours over half-known faces. All their eyes are ice, but nothing happens. And I think it would be sensible to start at the end of the poem, because actually this ultimately is where this stillness and immobility rests and finishes and finalises. And then we can start tracking up and through the rest of the poem, and I'll do this in blue for now, because even if we go up to the top, brambles do that job. They stop things still. They don't let things move forward. They don't let soldiers move forward and escape. The idea of ice, again, something that locks you in place and is solid. In the same way, there's an echo of that in the phrase, we only know war lasts. That war is perpetual, it's constant, it keeps on going. And again, does not allow soldiers to escape. So with those things, then, it kind of rests in this idea here with slowly our ghosts drag home, as though the soldiers have become separated from their own bodies. And ghosts, when we're considering this, are in purgatory. They're neither in heaven nor in hell. They are stuck. And actually, again, this image of the ghosts gives us this kind of stuck. They are in stasis. They are immobile. This is a kind of purgatory. So that gives us a really strong starting point. Now, as we continue to move through this poem, we have then these religious references as well. And certainly this comes through more strongly in these two stanzas that I've just highlighted in orange. Again, this finishes with a really miserable sentiment. For love of God seems dying. It's as though the world has become godless. And if that's happening, there's no redemption. There is no salvation. And that makes this poem seem nihilistic. And nihilism is a philosophical concept where there's no afterlife, no world after your own physical existence. That when you die, that's it. Everything is over. And actually we have that coming through really strongly here. And it's no wonder, because this certainly reflects the horrors of World War One. And actually we have that being strongly expressed in this poem. But alongside that, the poem certainly starts out, and I'll do this bit in green, with the natural world being strongly referenced. We see in the wire, this is going to be barbed wire. That turned into a metaphor of brambles. And remember, metaphors are all about translation. They turn something into something else. And in that sense, again, it's as though the synthetic, mechanical is fusing with nature. The whole environment is becoming inhospitable. And we can see that coming through and continuing. The gusts, the wind become mad. And at the same time, we see dawn as a melancholy army. And the rain, in my head, is referenced here in the shivering ranks of grey, as though it's constant. So the natural world is this constant presence, it's this limiting presence. And again, this comes through in the final parts of the poem, because actually the frost is this image of stillness, this image of pausing and hesitating and stopping and of immobility. And indeed, the eyes are left as ice. So again, the whole poem is about stasis. Everything stops, everyone is immobile. And in that sense, the natural world is preventing you from escaping. And then as we continue to move on, and I'll do this bit in brown, is we have the presence of the mechanical imagery. So we have the gunnery rumbling. We have the flares. These are all man-made things. We have the sudden successive flights of bullets. But interestingly, right next to that, it's less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow. So we are in winter. It is freezing. So then the natural world is as much a threat. And you could make a cross comparison here. In the same way as I said, the psychology of this is interesting through the comparison to Remains. Equally, you could compare this to Storm on the Island, because that's a poem that explores the nature of the natural world. And equally, when we study it, we could look at the extract from the prelude there as well. So these are some natural comparisons that you could make. But still, and what's interesting here is that the references to the natural world are significantly more frequent than the references to the synthetic, to the mechanized. So here we have all the way through here, all these references to the natural world, and they carry on. These pale flakes with fingering stealth, these flakes of snow. And they stare, they're snow-dazed, and they are deep into grassier ditches. So again, we have all this coming through. And by comparison, which I'll just highlight in pink, actually the presence of the military and the mechanized is comparatively infrequent. And actually it's that balance of this poem that makes it about winter, it makes it about freezing, makes it about being stillness and immobile. It makes it seem that you cannot escape the threat of warfare and conflict. So we'll pause there, add to your annotations, review this video if you want to, and then we will look in the next video at some of the patterns that run all the way through the poem before we go on to the third part, where you will take apart some quotations in detail.